300 years ago, humanity was dying. It began with the scientists. They noticed it first. A rogue neutron star was passing too close to the solar system. Its radiation was invisible to the naked eye, but it was deadly. Within months, the crops began to fail. The oceans turned strange colors. Animals died in great numbers, and then the people started getting sick. The governments of Earth tried everything. They built underground shelters. They created sealed cities. They poured all their money and knowledge into finding a solution. But there was no solution. The radiation would last for decades. Earth was becoming a tomb. 7 billion people waited to die. They had no way to leave. Humanity had only reached as far as Mars, and Mars could not hold everyone. They had no friends among the stars. They did not even know if anyone else existed out there in the darkness. All they could do was send radio signals into space, begging for help that would probably never come. But someone heard them. They were an ancient species. They had traveled the stars for longer than humans had existed. They were tall and gentle beings with soft gray skin and 3 arms that they used to express emotion. They had given up war millions of years ago. They believed that the universe was too beautiful for violence and that all thinking creatures deserved kindness. When they heard humanity's desperate cries, they did not hesitate. Their great came down through Earth's poison skis like silver clouds. There were hundreds of them, each one large enough to hold a city. They opened their doors and spoke to the frightened humans in soft, calm voices. "We have come to help you," they said. "We will take you somewhere safe." At first, many humans were afraid. They did not know these strange beings. They did not understand why anyone would help them. Some governments wanted to fight. Some people refused to leave their homes, even though staying meant death. But they were patient. They waited. They explained. They showed the humans images of a beautiful green world far away, a world with clean air and blue oceans and land enough for everyone. They called it Prime, and they were giving it to humanity as a gift. Slowly, the fear turned to hope. The evacuation took 3 years. They worked without rest. They carried the sick and the elderly in their arms. They made sure no child was left behind. They brought pets and seeds and books and everything that humans held dear. They did not rush. They did not complain. They treated every human life as if it was precious. And it was precious to them. Every life was precious to them. When the last ship left Earth's dying atmosphere, Ambassador stood on the observation deck with the human leaders. He was old even then, one of the most respected members of his species. He watched as Earth grew smaller and smaller behind them, a pale blue dot turning gray. "We are sorry we could not save your world," he said, "but we will give you a new one." The human leaders did not know what to say. They had no way to thank these strangers who had appeared from nowhere and saved their entire species. One of them, a woman named President, finally spoke. "How can we ever repay you?" she asked. Her voice was shaking. "You have saved all of us, every man, woman, and child. We owe you everything." Ambassador turned to look at her. His large, dark eyes were kind. He pressed his 3 arms against his chest, a gesture that meant peace and love in his culture. "You owe us nothing," he said softly. "Kindness requires no receipt." The humans never forgot those words. On Prime, humanity began again. They helped them build cities. They shared their medicine, which cured diseases that had killed humans for centuries. They gave them technology that made life easier. They taught them how to grow food in alien soil and how to breathe air that was slightly different from Earth's. And then, when humanity was strong enough to stand on its own, they said goodbye. "You are ready now," Ambassador told the new human government. "Go and find your place among the stars. We hope you will be happy." "Will we see you again?" asked the young Prime Minister, a man named. "Perhaps," said, "the universe is vast, but it is also connected. All paths cross eventually." They rose into the sky and disappeared into the darkness between stars. The humans watched them go with tears in their eyes. They built statues of them in every city. They taught their children about the gentle aliens who had saved them. They wrote songs and stories about the silver ships that had carried them to safety. Centuries passed. Humanity spread across the stars. They built colonies on dozens of worlds. They joined something called the Galactic Concord, a great alliance of thousands of different species. They became strong and proud and successful. But they never forgot their debt. Every human child learned the story of every human ship carried a small statue of ambassador. And somewhere, written into the very laws of human civilization, was a promise that had never been spoken out loud but was understood by everyone. If they ever needed help, humanity would answer, no matter what, no matter when, no matter the cost. Kindness might require no receipt. But humanity always remembered its debts. And humanity always paid what it owed. 200 years after humanity left Earth, things began to change. Admiral had served in the human fleet for 30 years. She had seen many things in her long career. She had fought pirates. She had explored unknown worlds. She had met species that looked like nothing she could have imagined, but nothing had prepared her for what she found in the classified files. It started with a simple question. "Why have they stopped talking to us?" she asked her officers one evening. They were sitting in her private quarters aboard the warship Remembrance. "I sent them a greeting last month like I do every year. No response." Her communications officer, a young man named Lieutenant Park, looked uncomfortable. "Admiral, they have been quiet for a long time now. The official reports say they are a dying species. They want to be left alone." "I know what the official reports say," replied. "I have read them many times, but something feels wrong. They would not just disappear. They would not ignore humanity. We meant something to them." She was right to be suspicious. The truth was hidden in layers of secrets. The Galactic Concord was a vast organization with thousands of species, and it had many secrets. Most species did not care about them. They were pacifists. They had no military power. They had stopped being important to galactic politics long ago. But Admiral cared, and she began to dig. She used old favors. She talked to friends in intelligence. She searched through databases that she probably should not have accessed. For months, she found nothing. The records had been cleaned. The files had been deleted. Someone had gone to great trouble to make sure no one knew what was happening to them. Then, one night, she received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. The message contained a single file. It was an audio recording, old and full of static, nearly destroyed by time and distance. But the voice was clear enough to understand. It was a voice, speaking in their slow, musical language. "Please," the voice said, "please someone help us. They are killing us. They are killing us. We have sent messages to the Concord. They do not answer. We have begged for help. No one comes. Our children are dying. Our elders are being slaughtered. Please, someone, anyone. We are being exterminated." The recording ended with the sound of explosions. Admiral sat in silence for a long time. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. She played the recording again and again. Each time the words cut deeper. She began to search for more, and she found it. They had not been dying of old age. They had not been fading quietly into history. They had been fighting a secret war for 40 years, and they had been losing. The Dominion was one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. They were a species of conquerors. They believed that the strong should rule and the weak should serve or die. They had been expanding their territory for centuries, swallowing smaller species one by one. They had something they wanted. Their ancient technology was valuable beyond measure. Their worlds were rich and beautiful, and their pacifist ways made them easy targets. They had attacked without warning. They had destroyed the fleet in a single battle. They had invaded their worlds one by one, and for 40 years they had been conducting a slow, careful genocide. The Galactic Concord knew Admiral found the proof. They had sent hundreds of distress signals to the High Council. They had begged for intervention. They had pleaded for someone to enforce the laws that were supposed to protect peaceful species. The High Council had discussed the matter in closed sessions. They had debated for months, and in the end, they had decided to do nothing. They were too powerful, they said. Intervention would be too costly. They had no military value. It was sad, but it was not the Concord's problem. They had classified the files and pretended they did not exist. Admiral felt something she had not felt in a long time. It was anger, deep, burning anger. The kind of anger that changes people. The kind of anger that changes history. She gathered her evidence. She contacted the other admirals. She prepared a presentation for Earth's government, and then she went home. Premier was the leader of human civilization. She was the great-great-granddaughter of the Prime Minister who had said goodbye to Ambassador 2 centuries ago. She had grown up hearing stories about the. She had a small statue of on her desk. When Admiral showed her the evidence, did not cry. She did not scream. She simply sat very still and watched the holographic images of burning cities and mass graves and children being torn from their parents. When it was over, she looked at Admiral. "How many are left?" "We do not know," replied. "Perhaps a few thousand, maybe less. They are finishing the job." Premier stood up. She walked to her window and looked out at the city below. Millions of humans lived there, going about their lives, not knowing what she had just learned. "They saved us," she said quietly. "Every human alive exists because of them. They asked for nothing. They expected nothing. And when they needed help, the galaxy turned its back on them." She turned to face Admiral. "Call the Parliament, call the admirals, call everyone." "What are you going to do?" asked. Premier's eyes were hard. "We are going to pay our debt." The Parliament building was full. Every seat was taken. Every screen across human space was showing the live broadcast. Billions of people watched as Premier walked to the center of the great chamber. She did not speak at first. She simply activated the holographic display. The images appeared in the air above her. Cities burning, bodies in the streets, children crying in camps surrounded by soldiers, mass graves being filled with the dead, recording after recording of desperate voices begging for help that never came. The Parliament watched in silence. Some representatives covered their mouths, others wept openly. A few had to look away. When the display ended, Premier spoke. 40 years, she said. Her voice was calm but heavy with emotion. For 40 years, our friends have been dying. The species that saved us from extinction has been slowly murdered while the galaxy watched and did nothing. She looked around the chamber. They never asked us for anything. When they carried 7 billion humans to safety, they did not demand payment. They did not want our resources. They did not ask for territory or power. They helped us because they believed it was the right thing to do, because they believed that kindness was its own reward. She paused. They were wrong. Kindness should be repaid. Debts should be honored. And when your friends are being killed, you do not stand by and watch. Admiral stepped forward. She activated a new display. It showed maps and numbers and military information. The Dominion has approximately 500 warships, she said. They have 2 million soldiers. They control 37 star systems. They are currently holding the last survivors on their aura. Our intelligence suggests they are planning to finish the extermination within the next few months. How many are left? Someone asked. We estimate between 3 and 5,000, replied. Mostly elderly, children, and a few who managed to hide. A murmur went through the Parliament. Such a small number, from a species that once numbered in the billions. What would it take to save them? Premier asked. Admiral took a deep breath. Everything. We would need to mobilize our entire military, every ship, every soldier. We would be outnumbered 5 to 1. The casualties would be severe. We might lose hundreds of thousands of our own people. The parliament was silent. The weight of the decision hung in the air. Then a representative from the colony of New Shanghai stood up. His name was Wei, and he was very old. His family had been among the first to board the 3 centuries ago. "My grandmother was carried onto a ship by Ambassador himself," he said. "She was sick and dying. He held her in his arms like she was his own child. He did not know her. He did not owe her anything, but he saved her anyway." He looked around at his fellow representatives. "Everything I have, everything my family has, everything our colony has, we give it gladly. Some debts cannot be measured in numbers." One by one, other representatives stood up. They spoke of grandparents who had been saved. They spoke of stories passed down through generations. They spoke of the statues in their cities and the songs their children learned in school. The vote was called. It was unanimous. Every single representative voted yes. Humanity was going to war. The next weeks were a storm of activity. Factories that had not produced weapons in a century began working day and night. Shipyards launched new vessels as fast as they could build them. Recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers. The response was beyond anything the government expected. People did not have to be asked twice. Retired soldiers came out of retirement. Young people who had never held a weapon demanded to be trained. Scientists and engineers offered their skills. Farmers promised extra food for the troops. Artists created posters and songs to lift spirits. On the colony of Prime, the original world that had given humanity, something special happened. The descendants of the first refugees gathered at the old landing site where they had first touched down. They lit candles and held hands and made a promise together. "We remember," they said. "We remember what you did for us. We are coming." The Galactic Concord sent warnings. Their diplomats arrived on human worlds with stern messages. This was illegal, they said. This violated treaties. The Dominion was a recognized power. Humanity had no right to interfere. Premier received them politely. She listened to their arguments. Then she gave her reply. "They sent you hundreds of messages begging for help. You ignored them. You let them die because it was convenient. You have no moral ground to stand on. You have no authority to tell us what is right and wrong." The diplomats sputtered. They threatened consequences. They warned of sanctions and isolation. "Do what you must," replied. "We will do what we must. This conversation is over." The human fleets gathered at the edge of space. 14 battle groups, 800 warships, 6 million soldiers. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the last of them were waiting. They did not know help was coming. They had given up hope long ago. She opened a channel to all ships. 300 years ago, we were the ones who needed saving," she said. "Today, we become the saviors. Remember why we are here. Remember who we are fighting for. Remember the debt we owe." She paused. "Let's bring them home." The fleet jumped into space. The war had begun. They did not understand what was happening. For centuries, they had conquered weaker species without consequence. The galaxy watched and did nothing. The conquered made speeches but never acted. They had grown used to being feared. They had forgotten what it felt like to be the ones who were afraid. When the human fleet appeared at their borders, the commanders laughed. These were the same humans who had needed to be rescued from their own dying planet. These were the weak ones, the beggars, the refugees. What could they possibly do against the mighty Dominion? They found out very quickly. The first battle lasted 6 hours. They had sent a defensive fleet of 80 ships to stop the human advance. They expected an easy victory. Instead, they watched in horror as human weapons tore through their shields. Human pilots flew with a skill and fury they had never seen. Human soldiers fought like they had nothing to lose. Because they didn't. They were not fighting for territory. They were not fighting for resources. They were fighting for something far more powerful. They were fighting to pay a debt. Admiral led from the front. Her ship, the Remembrance, was always in the thickest fighting. She did not ask her people to do anything she would not do herself. When a missile nearly destroyed her bridge, she simply gave orders from the backup command center while her crew put out fires around her. "We do not stop," she told her captains. "We do not slow down. Every minute we waste is a minute they use to kill more. Push forward, always forward." The human advance was relentless. System after system fell. Commanders who had spent their lives conquering others suddenly found themselves running away. Some tried to surrender. The humans accepted their surrender, treated their prisoners fairly, and kept moving. The leaders grew desperate. They sent messages to the Galactic Conquered, demanding intervention. The humans were violating laws, they said. The humans were aggressors. Something had to be done. The Conquered sent strongly worded messages to humanity. They threatened sanctions. They warned of consequences. Premier did not respond. She was too busy organizing supply lines and medical ships. After 8 months of fighting, the human fleet reached Aura. It was here that the last survivors were being held. It was here that the final act of genocide was being prepared. They had gathered their remaining forces to defend the planet. 200 warships formed a wall around the world. On the surface, soldiers guarded the camps where they were imprisoned. The commanders had received orders. If the planet was about to fall, they were to kill all the prisoners. Admiral looked at the enemy fleet on her display. It was the largest force she had ever faced. Her people were tired. They had been fighting for months. They had lost many friends. But they had not come this far to stop now. "All ships," she said. "This is Admiral. Behind that fleet is a world full of the beings who saved our ancestors. They have been waiting for rescue for 40 years. Today we answer their call. Today we pay our debt for humanity, for the attack." The battle for Aura was the bloodiest of the war. Human ships burned in the darkness of space. Warships exploded in balls of fire. For 11 hours, the two fleets tore at each other with everything they had. In the end, humanity won, but the cost was terrible. 112 ships destroyed, 40,000 lives lost. Admiral herself was injured when her bridge was hit. She refused to leave her post. As soon as the orbital battle was over, the ground forces began their descent. Captain Cole led the assault on Camp 7, the largest of the prison facilities. His battalion dropped from the sky in landing craft, taking heavy fire from defenders. All around him, soldiers fell, but they kept coming. They fought hard. They knew what would happen if they lost. They knew the humans would never forgive what they had done. They made their last stand at the gates of the camp. Captain Cole was the first through the breach. What he saw inside would haunt him for the rest of his life. Thousands of huddled together in the ruins of old buildings. They were thin and weak. Many were injured. Some were clearly dying. They looked up at the human soldiers with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. Then they saw the symbol on the soldiers' uniforms, the small statue of that every human unit carried into battle. A cry went up among the prisoners. It was a word in the language, one that Captain Cole did not understand at first, but later someone translated it for him. The word was remembered. They had thought the galaxy had forgotten them. They had thought they would die alone, but the children of the people they had saved had come for them. Captain Cole walked through the crowd until he found an elderly sitting against a broken wall. The being was ancient, barely able to move, but Cole recognized him from the statues that decorated every human city. "Ambassador." Cole knelt before him. He removed his helmet so the old ambassador could see his face. His eyes were filled with tears. "Ambassador," he said, "my name is Cole. My great-great-grandmother was saved by you 300 years ago. You carried her onto your ship when she was too weak to walk." Looked at him with tired eyes. "You saved us when we had nothing," Cole continued. You asked for nothing in return, but we never forgot. Humanity never forgets. We are here to bring you home. Slowly, with great effort, Ambassador raised his 3 arms and pressed them to his chest. The gesture of peace, the gesture of love. And for the first time in 40 years, the old wept. All around them, human soldiers and survivors embraced. Medical teams rushed in to help the wounded. Ships descended to carry the freed prisoners to safety. The debt was being paid. In full, the war lasted 18 months. When it was over, the Dominion was broken. Their military was destroyed. Their leaders were captured and put on trial for crimes against existence. Their conquered territories were set free. Species that had suffered under rule for generations finally knew peace. And they were saved. Only 4,216 of them remained. From a species that had once numbered in the billions, only 4,000 were left. Ambassador was among them. He was very old and very weak, but he was alive. Humanity helped them return to there. Human engineers rebuilt their cities. Human doctors healed their sick. Human teachers worked alongside elders to preserve their knowledge and culture. It would take generations for them to recover, but they would recover. They were no longer alone. But not everyone was pleased with what humanity had done. The Galactic Concord called an emergency summit. Representatives from 10,000 species gathered in the Great Hall of the Concord headquarters. The High Arbiters, the ancient beings who had led the Concord sat in judgment above the assembly. They were angry. Humanity had broken laws, they said. Humanity had violated treaties. Humanity had acted without permission and started a war that killed millions. This could not be allowed. There had to be consequences. Premier was summoned to answer for humanity's actions. She came alone. She walked through the massive doors of the Great Hall and looked up at the thousands of faces staring down at her. Some looked curious. Some looked hostile. Some looked afraid. She was not afraid. The chief arbiter, an ancient being named Han, spoke first. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. Premier of humanity, you stand before this Concord accused of violating the Galactic Peace Accords. You have waged unauthorized war. You have invaded the territory of a recognized power. You have caused the deaths of millions. What do you say in your defense? Premier stood in silence for a long moment. Then she began to speak. 40 years, she said. Her voice was quiet but somehow filled the entire hall. For 40 years they sent messages to this Concord. They begged for help. They pleaded for intervention. They screamed into the darkness while their children were murdered and their elders were slaughtered. She looked up at the High Arbiters. This Concord received those messages. This Concord read those messages. And this Concord chose to do nothing. A murmur went through the assembly. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You speak of laws and treaties, continued. You speak of peace accords and proper procedures. But where were your laws when they were dying? Where were your treaties when they built their camps? Where was your galactic peace when an entire species was being erased from existence? She turned slowly, looking at the representatives from every corner of the hall. I will tell you where they were. They were in files. They were in discussions. They were in committees and debates and endless meetings that accomplished nothing. They were convenient excuses for doing nothing while innocents suffered and died. The chief arbiter leaned forward. The Concord considered the matter carefully. Intervention was not strategically viable. They were too powerful. The cost would have been too great. Too great for whom? Replied. Not too great for the who lost everything. Not too great for humanity, which was willing to pay any price. The cost was only too great for those who had something to lose and lacked the courage to risk it. She took a step forward. 300 years ago, humanity was dying. We had no friends. We had no power. We had nothing to offer anyone, but they came anyway. They saved us not because it was easy or profitable, but because it was right. They gave us our future and asked for nothing in return. Her voice grew stronger. We repaid our debt. We did what this conquered should have done 40 years ago. We answered the call of a friend in need. And if that is a crime, then your laws are not worth the data they are written on. The hall was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Premier looked directly at the High Arbiters. You ask what right humanity had to act. We had the only right that matters, the right of the rescued to rescue in turn. They gave us everything when we had nothing. We simply returned the favor. She turned to face the full assembly one last time. We did not do this for power. We did not do this for territory. We did this because kindness should not go unrewarded. We did this because some debts must be paid. We did this because 300 years ago, strangers showed us mercy, and we refused to live in a galaxy where that mercy is answered with silence. She paused. We repaid our debt, in full. And if that frightens you, if the idea of a species that remembers its debts keeps you awake at night, then perhaps you should ask yourselves what debts you have failed to honor. Premier turned and walked toward the exit. Premier, the chief arbiter called out, "We have not dismissed you. This tribunal is not finished." She stopped at the door and looked back. "Yes, it is," she said. "We are done explaining ourselves to those who watched an innocent species burn and did nothing. We are done asking permission from those who forgot what compassion means." She walked through the door and was gone. No one tried to stop her. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed. Other species looked at humanity differently now. Some feared them. Some admired them. Some questioned their own choices. On Aura, they began to rebuild. Slowly, carefully, with human help, they planted gardens where camps had stood. They raised new cities from the ashes of the old. They taught their children about the dark times and about the friends who had come to save them. And in the center of their capital, they built a monument. It was a statue of Ambassador, his 3 arms pressed to his chest in the gesture of peace. But he was not alone. Beside him stood a human figure, hand outstretched in friendship. The words at the base were written in both and human languages. Kindness requires no receipt, but it will always be remembered. Every year on Liberation Day, humans gather at the monument together. They light candles. They hold hands. They remember what was lost and celebrate what was saved. And across the galaxy, species who once looked away now watch in silence, understanding perhaps for the first time that some debts can never be forgotten, and that humanity always pays what it owes.